Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme we'll be discussing the extraordinary stories being told by former members of US security personnel regarding the fact that the United States government has in their possession several alien aircraft, and that American scientists are actually working on reverse engineering on these spacecrafts. And we'll be asking, are aliens true? Or is this part of the End Times Delusion, as it feels like we are following in the footsteps of Mulder and Scully, the famous 1990s hit series called The X-Files. Regan, it's great to be doing such an interesting topic of you, whether the whole topic of aliens and extraterrestrials and UFOs and what have you. Plays a kind of major part in a kind of, it seems to be playing a major part in end times scenario as we look and address these serious claims by former US intel agents revealing these remarkable so-called state secrets.
It's always interesting, Simon, that aliens have captivated our culture for so long, going back to the ancients and their stories of gods among men and individuals, you know, supernatural circumstances, often how they're portrayed. I think they, in some ways, were closer to reality than how this is being portrayed in our modern era. You can think of H.G. Wells, and H.G. Wells was very anti-God, but had quite a few, admittedly, enthralling reads. His War of the Worlds was really incredible, and of course there have been multiple film adaptations, and I think even an opera, stage opera, built around that book. But there was a reading of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds at one point wherein people thought the end of the world has come. They actually believed it was a real news bulletin. So that's escalated, and you have you know, Signs, that great, I believe, Mel Gibson film, early 2000s, about aliens. You have A Quiet Place, all sorts. It's captivated the public attention. So people have been asking that question, are we alone? Is anyone out there? And how much money is spent each year by NASA and other space programs, even sending messages out to space in the hope or in the expectation that someone might respond, and that someone out there might respond positively, that that we are not alone.
Well, from a humanistic point of view, if we take this, take God out of the equation. I know we can never take God out of the equation because he is the creator of the heavens and the earth. He's the one that created the universe. But if you have a kind of secular humanist mindset, and you see the kind of universe and the mass expanse of universe, it would seem logical from that perspective that in this huge universe that we wouldn't actually be alone, that there would be other life forms on other planets. So when you have that mindset, it's easy then to believe in aliens. It's easy then to believe in unidentified flying objects. It's easy to believe then that the US government has been covering up for the last 8 decades alien aircraft, which is extraordinary. And it's these stories that inspired science fiction. You know, I think my childhood has been dominated by watching kind of the Star Wars movies. So we got Star Wars movies, we got E.T. as well. You know, we've got an incredible film called Aliens, Independence Day, Men in Black, and of course X-Files as well with Mulder and Scully, that used to be a kind of hit series when I was at university in the 90s as well. Have all played a major role in kind of conditioning you know, the culture in the West to believe that there are aliens out there, that there is other life forms out there. But what I think is extraordinary, Regan, is the fact that a number of highly decorated, high-profile US security personnel have recently come out in public and said that they've actually know that the government has what it describes as unhuman craft, or effectively alien aircraft. So this effectively means that we are now in a kind of uncharted waters, as they also think that it will only be a question of time before the US government announces that we're not alone and there is extraterrestrial life forms out there, which is extraordinary. And either this is true or this is part of the End Times Delusion in which we'll see the rise of the Antichrist. So a very interesting but also very topical topic of discussion for tonight.
Yeah, some in security and scientific circles even believe that the U.S. government is soon going to publicly disclose that extraterrestrial life is real. Now, at the same time, Simon, I have seen for years headlines, blurbs about, oh, are aliens real? We both have. That's part of that conditioning element, that extraterrestrials are out there. And even UFOs, how UFO, which simply means unidentified flying object, has been taken as synonymous with alien aircraft, which it's not meant to be. That just points to this whipping up, really, of fear in some cases, or speculation. Area 51, you know, there's a lot of undeniable stuff that can be found, facts and evidence that's open access that can be found in regards to what's special about Area 51, what's happened at Roswell. And it's believed that Soviet engineers and whatnot that there was human experimentation involved on children particularly, just weird, gross, I'll just say that, put it that way, gross experimentation that saw aircraft, Soviet aircraft flying over Roswell, Arizona somehow. I mean, this is one of the historical features that's out there that individuals can access. But now we're having this portrayal that it's aliens, right? And it will be interesting to have this conversation now and to develop what we first began talking about a couple of years ago, really.
No, absolutely. So what's also interesting is that according to US security personnel, they suggest that the US government scientists are actually working on spacecraft that has non-human origins and have reverse engineering alien technology for some time. Effectively, that means that they are working on, say, an alien spacecraft. They are wanting to know how it works, what is the materials, and essentially understanding how that aircraft was actually made or object was made. That's what reverse engineering is. And it's also believed that security in scientific circles that the US government will publicly soon announce extraterrestrial life form is real. So also, according to US Christian astronomer Hugh has also researched stories of those who claimed that they have seen UFOs or had alien encounters. And he says they're often those are being mixed up in the New Age or occultic practices. And he points to UFOs as being evidence of demonic activity. And of course, we also have here, this is why we're doing this program, because a former member of the National Geoparticle Intelligence Agency, which is the US government for covering the evidence of UFOs, has come out publicly only recently. And according to a recent article in The Independent, an Air Force veteran has made a bombshell claim that the US government has recovered materials that could be proof of UFOs, including intact craft of non-human origin, but they are keeping it a secret from the public. And this guy is David Giles Grush, a veteran and former member of the National Geoparticle Intelligence Agency and National Reconnaissance Office, has blown the whistle on this information, speaking with several news outlets about the crafts. He says these are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, called it a spacecraft, if you will, non-human exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed. And he told that to Nation News.
He said he was first refused access to a materials recovery program that included physical evidence of crafts. He was quoted, "I thought it was totally nuts and thought at first I was being deceived. It was a ruse," Mr. Grush told News Nation. And people started to confide in me, approach me. I have plenty of senior former intelligence officers that came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me that they were part of a program. He told the debrief that he's prepared many briefs on UFOs for Congress, but last year decided to provide hours of classified information and data about the materials recovery program. Now, the Independent, it says just to clear, like this isn't coming from just some sort of wacky, weird tabloid like that you have sometimes on the shelves in the States. That it's clearly false stuff. The Independent has actually covered this. As you already said, he's a 36-year-old veteran of the U.S. Air Force. You can find those facts out for yourself as well. He's the National Geospatial Intelligence, veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. Decorated former combat officer in Afghanistan, according to the debrief. And from 2016 until 2021, he served as a senior intelligence officer with the National Reconnaissance Office. So he was high-ranking. From 2019 until 2021, he was the office's representative to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena UAP task force. From late 2021 until July 2022, he co-led the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's UAP analysis, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. In total, Mr. Grush has 14 years of intelligence experience, and at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, he was a senior intelligence capabilities integration officer and had top secret compartmented information level clearance. So this guy he's decorated in that way. He has a clear pedigree of what some would assume of trustworthiness.
No, absolutely. And also, he's not alone either. We also see that these claims are also backed by Christopher Mellon. And Christopher Mellon is a private equity investor, a research affiliate with Harvard University Galileo Project, a senior advisor to the Americans for Safe Aerospace. He was a former minority staff director of the Senate Intelligence Committee and former deputy assistant secretary of defense for intelligence. Now, the one thing you have to realize is that if these guys have been dealing with and working with classified information, which they have been, to come out publicly and talk about the existence of aliens, the existence of alien aircraft, means that they would have to have the say-so of American security agencies. Otherwise, there's no way they'd be allowed to publicly speak. So almost as if, say, the Pentagon or US intelligence agencies are actually allowing these guys to come out and make these incredible statements to believe that there is extraterrestrial life form, that there is alien spacecraft, is extraordinary.
Now, it's interesting, though, that here's a quote. This is a quote from Christopher Mellon. He says, "Since 2017, my life has been dominated by efforts to help Congress and the public discover the truth about unidentified aerial phenomena, what many still refer to as UFOs. I've lost count of the number of cities visited, meetings attended, books read, articles written, media appearances, and hours spent on the phone. At the outset, my goal was simply to help our government overcome a glaring intelligence failure. UAP were routinely violating restricted U.S. airspace, but these encounters documented on cockpit videos weren't being reported up the military chain of command because of the stigma surrounding the issue. It wasn't clear if these bizarre craft were Russian, Chinese, extraterrestrial, or some combination of the above, but it seemed unacceptable and outrageous that no effort was being made by the intelligence community to alert policymakers or undertake an investigation." Working closely with former Pentagon official Louis Elizondo and later a group of U.S. Navy aviators, we quickly captured the attention of Congress. We managed to convince them the phenomena were real and America needed to take action to determine the capabilities of these craft and the identity and intentions of their operators. So it's interesting, even there's a recognition. They don't actually, in that moment, know the source of these aircraft. They know that there's a lot of entry into restricted airspace. They know these are unidentified flying objects. They can't identify if they're Russian, Chinese, extraterrestrial, or it could be any other country as well, to be honest. But they recognized that this was a threat and it needed to be reported.
No, absolutely. And also he goes on to talk about, he says, to my surprise and delight, in 2020, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence adopted my proposal to seek an official report on UAPs from the intelligence community. The resulting preliminary assessment arrived in June of 2021, although it was widely incomplete. It identified 144 military UAP encounters, or UFOs, identified it widely as, but it also goes on to say that since 2004, a figure which has since jumped up to over 800 military UAPs reports by early 2023. Spurred by growing evidence of the problem, Congress took additional steps and established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office to actually look into these issues related to UFOs. So we know that the US intelligence and the US government is taking this extremely seriously, but also when you're having accounts of pilots actually seeing unidentified flying objects, because you imagine the speed, you're in one of the big American fighter jets, you see something go along your eye line. Yeah, I mean, you are traveling so fast. And you're seeing something quickly and then it just goes, which is extraordinary, but also seems to be over sensitive military areas where a lot of these so-called UFO sightings are taking place.
Which to me, Simon, does call into question a little bit, just on one level, okay, could these be other programs that are operating? Because again, UFO, unidentified flying object, the pilots may not even know what's going on, you know, because it is unidentified, they can't identify it. Despite breakthroughs in government transparency about sightings, there's one thing the Pentagon and intelligence community have so far not addressed, and that's whether they've had any direct contact with these objects. Persistent rumors that the U.S. government recovered crash materials from UAP, and even that the government has been working secretly to reverse engineer the technology. We can look even at some of the materials that have been gained from what turned out to be that Chinese balloon, spy balloon, whatever it was. You know, there's all sorts of reasons and rationales being given as to what was going on there. You dig deeper and you find out actually this has been happening quite a lot. And they actually had to do something, and this one got attention, and which is why they shot it down.
Yeah,
so
got too embarrassing for the Biden administration.
Yeah,
had to act and stuff as well. But I think one thing that makes this different in the case is the fact that these are very well decorated men that have dedicated their life to the defense of the United States. They are intel security experts. And they are come out and discussing this stuff. Also, it says here that commercial satellite imagery is becoming ambiguous, and algorithms are already being written to identify the UAP from space. And more powerful, dedicated sensors are deployed to collect UAP data. So it's only a matter of time before a more compelling UAP imaginary and data emerges, although UAP generally seems to avoid public exposure, but there are exceptions. He gives examples. So in March 1950, an incident in which dozens of UAPs flew over Flemington, New Mexico in broad daylight, the famous flyover of Washington, D.C., on successive weekends in July of 1952, the Night of UFOs in Brazil in 1986, the Phoenix Lights in 1997, and so these are just examples of mass UFO sightings.
Well, I mean, the Phoenix Lights there in 1997, those were later, the first set of lights anyway, were later identified in a particular fashion. I have here that there were different events that were spread out over a course of some 480 kilometers. And it does seem that the first group was later identified as a formation of A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft flying in formation over Phoenix while returning to Davis-Monthan. And then the second group of lights were identified in another fashion. So, but then the question is, there's so much distrust, and there's been so many lies that have been said over the years to explain away different things. That it's created an atmosphere also wherein people automatically question if something is explained. So those have all happened, but now we have these individuals that we're speaking of, high-ranking, who are saying, no, this is, these are only explained as being non-human aircraft, or non-human spacecraft of some sort. That's what they're saying. And they're saying that there are documents that identify them as such. So the question that we're, asking is specifically to do with this is, are aliens real? Can it be that they're real, or is there some end times delusion aspect?
Well, this is the topic of tonight's discussion, Regan, and when we actually reflect upon it, the world would like to think that there is alien life form, but we know, for example, if you take this theologically, that God created humanity in His own image, and therefore, if God, as a result of sin, Adam and Eve sinning, then gave up on the human race. And then created other life forms on other planets, effectively means saying that He's failed. Why then save us? Why do you need to send a savior? Why does He have to send His own Son in order to save us if God then decided to have other planets with other life forms exist in the universe? It doesn't make any sense. So therefore, the whole topic of this one is about the sanctity of humanity, and the reason why humanity exists is to worship God, as in to kind of replace the angels that fell in the battle that Satan took, as it were, a third of the angels with him, and he's been trying to get back to that place ever since. So if there is alien life form out there, there is life on other planets, then effectively God has failed in His creation. That's why I don't actually believe that there is aliens. However, I believe that as we are moving closer and closer to the tribulation period, and what the Bible talks about as the great delusion, this is one argument that could be made for the case of what happens with the pre-trib rapture. But the fact is that what is giving this story that we're discussing today so much weight is the caliber of people coming out and discussing these things. I mean, like, for example, this one guy that we mentioned earlier, so I just forgotten his name very briefly for the moment, just to go back to my notes. Anyway, so he says that if we have recovered off-world technologies, our best and brightest minds should be engaged in evaluating it. Assuming that UAP propulsion technology is distinct from anything known to the public, a successful reverse engineering program might bring about a revolution in energy, transportation, and materials technology. We might even be able to accelerate a transition to clean and cheap energy, perhaps even develop superconducting materials and propulsion technologies that are now the stuff of Hollywood movies. So it's almost saying that we can actually build a better world. And what I also like about what he says here as well, and this fits into the End Times Delusion, says, I can't think of anything more likely to shock humanity out of its present commonplace than the revelation that we're not alone. Our species and planetary civilization is following a dangerous trajectory, one involving a serious prospect of nuclear conflagration. If that were not enough, all nations face the joint prospect of accelerating ecological devastation, the proliferation of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons, and the threat that AI will become weaponized or turned against humanity, as the brilliant Israeli historian Yuval Harari has observed. And he says, each of these three problems, nuclear war, eschatological collapse, and technological disruption, is enough to threaten the future of human civilization. But taken together, they add up to an unprecedented existential crisis, especially because they are likely to reinforce and compound one another. He goes on to say, a common enemy is the best catalyst for forging a common identity. And this is where we could see the end time scenario fits in. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN News report on believed UFO sightings.
The release of a U.S. government report analyzing UFO activity is stirring up more questions than answers. The Department of Defense reviewed more than 140 videos showing odd-shaped objects making unusual patterns of movement. They include what's called unidentified aerial phenomena that seem to defy the capabilities of existing technology. The Pentagon report concluding there were no clear links to alien life. Now, a Wall Street Journal op-ed says those UFOs may be earthly and dangerous, adding that adversaries of the U.S. could be developing technology to disrupt flight systems, and that the U.S., too, could be doing the same. And joining us now is the writer of that Wall Street Journal op-ed, legal analyst and investigative reporter, Jeffrey Scott Shapiro. Jeffrey, thank you for coming on the show tonight. How serious is this threat? You mentioned flight systems. What else could be at risk?
Well, I think it is a serious threat because these technologies were designed to possibly confuse our fighter pilots during combat aviation situations, so that if a pilot is flying in the sky and they see possible enemy aircraft, the enemy aircraft could possibly have other images beside them so that our pilots can't actually tell what the real target is. And because this technology appears to be able to show up on different sensors, not only infrared, but radar, it's quite possible that our pilots would not be able to tell which target is the real one, and they may inadvertently fire a heat-seeking Sidewinder missile at what is actually a hologram of an aircraft or a UFO instead of the actual target while it's firing upon us.
Yeah. Is this the 2018 U.S. Navy patent for laser technology that you're talking about?
Correct. There's a patent for the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center Pacific, where they are using laser plasma technology to project holographic images that would project sort of a type of unidentified flying object in the sky. And as you know, a lot of people, especially military personnel, are seeing these tic-tac shapes or UFOs in the sky, but a lot of times the appearance seems to be grainy. We don't see where they land. We don't see where they take off. And so if there was actually a laser image projecting a hologram, that could not only explain those factors, it could also explain the fact that a lot of these images seem to be able to move in a very erratic fashion that defy our laws of physics.
You know, we hear a lot about UFOs in the media, but we don't hear a lot about this laser technology that you're talking about and that you write about. Why do you think that is?
You know, that's an excellent question. I think that the media obviously loves a panic. They love great stories. This is an exciting story that everyone's always waited for answers on. But I also think that the media is sometimes politically tilted. We see that with climate change. We've seen it with the pandemic. And a possible extraterrestrial incursion of any kind is precisely the kind of panic that the media likes to generate headlines from. And it could also generate political responses, such as creating more global protocols. Okay, so for whatever reason, I think this technology is probably very complicated. It's hard for people to understand, and it's harder to explain in a simple headline. So I have to say that I'm disappointed, for one, that the media has not explored all avenues of this, because when I see journalists sort of shake their heads and say, well, what else could it possibly be? This is a possible answer of what some UAP could be. So when Senator Marco Rubio says we have to have an honest and intelligent discussion about this, I agree. But I think that an honest and intelligent discussion includes everything, and that means complicated weaponry as well.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your op-ed that you put in the Wall Street Journal. It's UFOs may be earthly and dangerous, and we would direct all of our viewers to go ahead and read that. Jeffrey Scott Shapiro, it's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this week's special guest for Behind the Headlines is Pastor Jeff Quazzo from Calvary Chapel Church. Jeff, warm welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Simon. Thank you so much for having me.
And Jeff, you were on a couple of weeks ago, did an excellent job talking about the prophetic significance of the red heifers in Israel. And now we're here today talking about aliens and the End Times Delusion. What's your perspective on so many high-profile US security personnel coming out openly to say that they believe in UFOs? And what's more is that US government scientists have actually been working on alien spacecraft.
You know, Simon, once again, as we find ourselves in these last days, which we know the Bible has told us for literally thousands of years would come. And now we find ourselves looking at the signs of the times around us, expecting certain unique circumstances to be taking place. This actually, it might be shocking, but it's not really surprising because, well, I think we've been continually watching, even over the last few years, our whole planet being prepared for unique circumstances that are going to take place. There's been a definite time of being, I think, moved and kind of directed in certain ways, conditioning that has been happening to our society. And I feel like, again, as you maybe will hear me say today, this is just one more of those kinds of events that seems like it's conditioning and preparing people for unusual events that are going to unfold and take place, maybe very possibly in the very near future.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on the former U.S. intelligence personnel who are making these public statements that for 8 decades the U.S. government has known about UFOs and even has several crashed alien aircraft under wraps?
Oh man, I think we could go down a rabbit trail, possibly.
Yeah, definitely.
on this one, we could certainly move into the realm of many a conspiracy theory. I mean, we could talk about all different things that the U.S. government has been doing for the last 50, 60, 70 years that are questionable or unknown to us. What I've found oftentimes in light of a discussion like this around, say, alien life form or unidentified flying objects is when we don't understand, which I can safely say to you guys, I don't understand what the U.S. government is doing and what they have behind closed doors. Yet I'm not going to get too caught up on chasing down and trying to figure out what men are up to in that realm. But more importantly, when we don't understand what might be happening and there is talk of alien life form and such, we stand upon or we rest upon, we fall back on what we do understand. And I do believe that there is another dimension. And so, yes, there are things happening beyond our scope of vision and sight that maybe some are referring to as alien life form.
And Jeff, it's interesting. There was a public survey in which Americans were questioned about their kind of belief in aliens. I think this was back in July of 2021. And it revealed that 64% of Americans believed in aliens and that we are not in the universe. Share with us the role that Hollywood has played in actually playing upon the public imagination, particularly in America, that aliens exist and that the US government has been predominantly hiding their existence. Made famous by the X-Files, by Star Wars, Star Trek, E.T., name but a few.
Yeah, I mean, sure. There is an entertaining component to this mystery of what could be happening, what might be happening outside of this realm that we're in on planet Earth. And I always find it curious that, like, whether it's, Elon Musk and others trying to get to Mars now, and we have all this talk about going into space even further and exploring to find, alien life form and what have you. And yet, here we are on our planet, the same world that God so loved that he gave his only begotten son to die for the individuals on this planet. And so it intrigues me that so much time is spent kind of almost in a sense being distracted by, I mean, yes, entertaining, of course, E.T., growing up with movies like that and the X-Files and other movies. But the fact remains, people are being, I believe, distracted by this concept of, maybe there's life out there, when the fact remains we have a life here that God desires to seek and save the lost. And that's where, our focus is, that there's a planet full, about 8 billion people on this planet. There's life forms that need Jesus, that need the love of God, and yet to kind of get distracted and taken away to a different realm doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense when there's a world right in front of us that God so loved that he gave his life for us.
Do you think aliens are real, or do you
Well, as the question remains, like people might say, "Oh, we're not alone." I agree with that. Actually, we're not alone. And what do I mean when I say that? I wholeheartedly believe in another dimension. God himself, Jesus, when he was here on this planet, he came, and when he was leaving, he said, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you." And if we think back to even, for example, the resurrection, you remember that story after the resurrection where the disciples were telling Jesus, they were saying, the disciples were telling Thomas, "Hey, we've seen him." Thomas clearly wasn't there when Jesus had showed up. And so we've seen the Lord. He's alive. He's resurrected from the dead. And Thomas is like, "Oh man, I am not going to believe that unless I can, stick my hand in his side or my finger in his nail prints." I mean, kind of a, bold statement, but the point being, just a little bit later, it then tells us that Jesus shows up, and it makes it very clear while the doors were closed. So somehow with a terrestrial body, a celestial body, no longer a terrestrial body, something that was made for another dimension, because that's what, again, 1 Corinthians 15 talks about, that there are terrestrial bodies, but there's also celestial bodies. And you and I will be given a celestial body. We'll be given something that can function outside of this dimension. And so Jesus here appears to his disciples, and he says to Thomas, "Go ahead, Thomas, put your hand in the nail prints, or put your finger in my side." And Thomas is like, "You heard that? You were here? You heard what I said?" So clearly we understand that there is another dimension among us, and that there is a spiritual realm, for sure. Paul would talk about it. When we wrestle, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness of this age, spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. So there is a spiritual dimension that truly is all around us. And we could go on and on about different stories in the Bible where we're told that, yes, there will be. I mean, you could entertain angels unaware, it tells us. We see angels showing up in the Old Testament. We see them showing up in the New Testament, and demonic activity as well.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on a prominent Christian astrologer who has made a direct correlation between UFO and alien sightings and those who have been directly involved in the occult and also in the New Age movement?
Yeah, no, that makes actually a lot of sense, Simon, because what we find is, even in the Bible, it talks about pharmakia. And with the occult, oftentimes, and with these things, there's often mind-altering drugs that also come with a lot of what's happening there. And so that is an open door. When you take drugs of that nature, you are literally opening the door to demonic activity. You're saying, "Come on in." And what we found is that lives are being manipulated and really destroyed oftentimes. But it's also mind-altering in the way where people are seeing and experiencing things that are outside of this dimension, because they're opening the door to the darkness of, as I just referred to, those principalities and powers. And they don't have the protection of God's Holy Spirit within them because they aren't, believers in Jesus Christ. And so they are finding themselves having these kinds of experiences, or we might even say out-of-body experiences, or having these visions or seeing these things, whatever the case might be. And interesting you bring up the New Age also, because we know within New Age belief that there is this idea that, for even you and me as Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, there's this sense like we are an intolerant people, we're not progressive enough. And for them, they see that as, hey, once we can get rid of these intolerant, non-progressive people, we can usher in the age of Aquarius. So in essence, they have already within their belief system, there is going to be a removal of these people from the planet at some point, because we want to move into all that, we were created for in that sense with the age of Aquarius. And so it's curious that there is this phenomenon happening right now, almost as I said earlier, conditioning the population for UFOs, alien life form, maybe a disappearance of a number of people all of a sudden.
On that one, could the threat of alien invasion be used to try to bring about the establishment of a one world government?
I mean, no question. This is an interesting question you just asked, because what we find is, let's talk about it. Whether we're talking about environmental issues, whether we're talking about a virus, whether we're talking about alien life form, what do all these things create? They generate a fear, right? And with fear, oftentimes people are willing to surrender certain rights and privileges for the sake of peace and safety. If you can just keep me safe, then here, you can have my rights, you can have my, freedoms. And so they'll surrender freedoms at the cost of, or for the price of peace and safety. But one of the things about what I've just talked about, and then you could say this about like a war on terror, for example, or, an environmental crisis, all these things that are used as fear-mongering tactics that get people to move in certain directions. What happens is there's no real way to quantify, are we winning? Are we doing better? Something that is, kind of that vague as like a war on terror or an environmental crisis or a fear of aliens, like you never know if you're safe. You never know if you've done enough. You never know. And so you live in this constant state of confusion or fear or anxiety, so they can continue to keep you in that place. And so, yeah, no question, this could be one more tactic of, hey, we have to protect ourselves, we have to defend ourselves, and as a world, as global citizens, we need to come together to protect ourselves from alien life forms that are out there. So yeah, it's sure, of course it could.
And Jeff, we just want to thank you so much for being our special guest. We didn't even talk about the prospect of the pre-tribulation rapture being used to explain by the Antichrist why millions, if not a billion Christians have disappeared from the face of the earth. So this could be part of the End Time Delusion. Really appreciate your comments and your expertise, and thank you so much for being our guest on Behind Headlines.
Thanks,
Hey,
Jeff.
it's always a privilege. Simon, Regan, great seeing you guys again.
It was always really helpful to have Jeff answering some of those questions there with us. I think we do have to look at this, Simon, from a biblical lens. As Christians, it's so crucial that we view what's going on in the world and what people are saying, even their own experiences, through the lens of Scripture, and we look at the bigger picture going on. And you had that question there, particularly about those wrapped up in the occult and New Age, and I think that already begins to signify to us something of the spiritual nature of some of these claims, the spiritual element behind even the obsession with UFOs and the amount of expense that's being thrown at investigating. I'm talking billions being thrown at extraterrestrial research each year. So, the reason that we see all of this going on, it's not just coincidental that there's stuff happening laying the foundations for the future. 65% of Americans, according to the Independent, a poll taken in 2021, said that they believe in aliens.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
But that hasn't that much to do with the kind of influence of Hollywood, as we discussed, the influence of Star Trek, Star Wars, the X-Files, Aliens, and Nathan's favourite, Doctor Who as well, have all played their part really in kind of Western culture, and to actually think that aliens exist and there are alien life forms that in a kind of, because we've moved so far away from our Judeo-Christian heritage, that this creates a spiritual vacuum.
Culture shapes us.
And this is what is being consumed by our current culture. And this is why I think this is what's so good about this program today as well, is the fact that this program can appeal beyond kind of Christian circles, particularly to a younger generation who are caught up with the whole concept of aliens and extraterrestrials and UFOs, to realize that actually this might not be true, but what this is kind of leading us towards the end times delusion that the whole world were deceived if it were possible, where Jesus talked about this in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 25, talking about the great deception that is coming upon the earth, and it's also mentioned in Thessalonians as well. But there is seem to be a link between those who believe in aliens or have seen aliens or have had a UFO encounters with the occult and those involved in the New Age movement. So an article written by Charles Colson back in January of this year, and according to the Stanford astrology professor 25 years ago, he surveyed 1,300 astronomers from the American Astronomical Society and found out that only 5%, or 62 of them, had actually seen a UFO. He says astronomers with just a few observation hours per year witnessed UFOs, whilst the majority who did more than 1,000 hours per year saw nothing.
Those who are deeply involved in the occult or New Age pursuits are the ones who often saw UFOs. Charles Colson quotes Hugh, a Christian astronomer and author, and has documented people who have had UFO encounters, and he says that they strike them with fear, distress, and anxiety. And of course we know that what we have from the Lord is not a spirit of fear. And so what's going on here seems to have, we can, I believe, say accurately, a demonic element to it, almost certainly. Potentially in some cases angelic, but almost certainly in many cases, if not most, demonic. Others experience nightmares, visions, hallucinations, and personality changes as a result. Ross gives an example of UFO cults that have been established that deny the divinity of Christ and the need for a Savior. These UFOs are evident of demonic activity. I think of that one cult group, Heaven's Gate, which you know, they all took their inspiration from even some of the sci-fi culture that's out there and committed mass suicide. Wearing, I believe it was Nike tracksuits, all matching tracksuits, before committing mass suicide, because that was the way they could escape this world that was about to be destroyed, and they would be transported to a special portal to take them to the new world. It's just, you know, incredibly demonic. And you look at their teachings and their practices, and you see it's deeply, deeply embedded in occultism, New Age beliefs, drug usage as well, very heavy on the drugs in some cases, and also preying on extremely vulnerable, often traumatized people. So that's kind of the source of what's whipping all of this up. You know, I think there is very definitely the need to assess and to speak as Christians, because I'm encountering, Simon, pastorally, even individuals who will profess to believe in Christ, but who lack clarity, the crystal clear clarity that's needed, that whatever is there is not alien life forms that are highly intelligent or of greater intelligence than ourselves. These are intelligent beings, yes, there are other beings that are out there, but we even at times as Christians have fallen into the trap of thinking humanistically rather than spiritually. And it's as if we only operate in the dimension of the here and now and what we know here and now, without remembering or actively knowing that there's ongoing war in the heavenlies. There is a spiritual dimension that exists that the scriptures speak of time and time again.
I mean, in terms of outlaying the kind of end times delusion and end times theory of where aliens could fit in, because I think this is a very important part of the program to discuss, you can actually see essentially what Christopher Mellon is talking about. we're seeing that our world is disintegrated at the moment. We see that there's a really awful war with Russia and Ukraine that's tearing Europe apart and the world apart. We're seeing that, for example, China's on the verge of possibly invading Taiwan. The Iranian regime is close to achieving nuclear weapons. The world is kind of fragmenting as we speak, facing ecological and economic disaster, the threat of nuclear proliferation, the fact that a terrorist organization can get their hands on a nuclear material and carry out a nuclear attack is enough to keep any prime minister or president awake at night with the intelligence reports that come onto their desk. Now, if it can be revealed that aliens exist and that the US government can say, look, here is some alien spacecraft, our US scientists have been working on this to improve this one, and these aliens provide a threat, like in Independence Day, to the security and sovereignty of the world, and our existence is a threat, we have to unite. So you can see, for example, this being a major role in order to prepare governments to give up their sovereignty and come into a formation of a one world government, which is a satanic plan. But also could be the reason of what the Antichrist does when he's revealed, and explaining what happens with the pre-trib rapture. For those who believe in the pre-trib rapture, like myself, is that there's huge questions that need to be answered after that. So you're going to have a disappearance of millions of born-again Christians around the world. Those who have also have died as part of the disappearance are those involved in planes or driving their cars or huge car crashes and what have you, plane crashes, disasters because of the pre-trib rapture. And suddenly, you know, the world's population gets reduced by 2/3. You could then, Antichrist could come on the scene and say, look, these people that have gone have been taken away because they are stopping the evolutionary leap that mankind needs to make to reach to a higher level of consciousness. And what I find very interesting with the whole alien and UFO concept is there's a direct link between New Age thinking and also these end time scenarios, and considering also that the Star Wars central theme running through the Star Wars films is this New Age concept as well. It's not too difficult to work out how this could actually be used by a figure like the Antichrist to assume power and create a one world government.
It presents a lot of theological problems. You touched on one earlier, just to reiterate that the Bible doesn't mention any other creation. The only creation it mentions, the only other creation it mentions is the new creation, right? That initially begins in our hearts and our minds, but then in a redeemed new heaven and new earth of righteousness, where the Lord Jesus Christ reigns, and so that's to come. That's to come, right? So, but the Scriptures do speak routinely of, and there's historical record as well, which goes alongside that, of fallen angels visiting the earth, Satan. And other angels as well, not just fallen angels. Others have an account that they give before God. Angels are ministering spirits sent to be with God's people, but there's a comforting presence that's there, not a fear-stoking and whipping up presence that we have in the demonic. Every time the angels appear, we see some of their first words: "Fear not. It's okay," right? We know this is a bit strange, but in these cases that we're talking about, this is all about fear. This is all about suspicion. This is all about plots and conspiracy and what are we going to do? And the government's covering it up, and it's whipping people up into this frenzied, wide-eyed state of terror. And that's what it's all about. Satan loves it. But we see there in the very beginning, Satan and the encounter with Eve, they're interested in actively altering our progress and our process, how we live our lives day to day, causing maximum disruption. We see the devil spoken of as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit now at work in the sons of disobedience. And so there's confusion. He desires to confuse and create chaos in different ways. And he's spoken of as the god of this world, the god of this age, because we think humanistically as Satan desires us to think. We give into these theories, and we go after these things that are out there that have no evidence of being extraterrestrial, of being alien in the sense that people are thinking of, rather than looking at all of the evidence that we have concerning the one true God and concerning Jesus Christ, who came and lived and died and was resurrected so that we might have life in His name. We crave this death cult of aliens, which is demonic, rather than the life-giving truth and hope that's found in Jesus Christ.
But doesn't it also show the depth that humanity has actually sunk? And I think there is a comparison as well, that in certainly since the end of the Second World War and what we've seen over the 60s and 70s is essentially an occultic explosion in the West, if not around the world. And with that increase of occultic explosion, we're seeing more UFOs reportings and sightings, and more people interested in the kind of supernatural and the occult. Regan, will come to the end of the program, but that was quick and an interesting topic, so thank you so much for your contribution. And want to thank you for watching this program at home. We can believe in aliens, we can believe in alien life forms, or we can believe in the true and living God and His Son, Jesus Christ. And that's where we should put our attention is. There is a danger that we can get caught up too much in the supernatural, particularly the focus on aliens and extraterrestrials are just merely a distraction, will be used by the Antichrist in order to bring about a delusion on the populations of the world. We are told not to be deceived, and one of the biggest indicators that we're in the last days is deception. And this is nothing but an end time deception. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.